Sir, economy is in the back. The words sliced through the first-class cabin with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. At 6:12 p.m. on a humid summer evening at O'Hare International Airport, passengers settling into Skybridge Airlines Flight 217 looked up from their phones and travel magazines as the confrontation unfolded in row 2. The man standing beside seat 2A didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held a boarding pass between two fingers and looked at the flight attendant who had just dismissed him. Marcus Bennett, 47 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, dressed in faded jeans, clean white sneakers, and a plain black t-shirt, looked nothing like the image Victoria Hayes expected to see in first class. Victoria was 39, blonde, polished, and proud of her 10 years with the airline. She glanced at the boarding pass for less than a second before shaking her head. "That seat isn't available anymore," she said. "You'll need to move." Marcus looked at the number printed on the ticket, then at the seat, then back at her. "This says 2A. Victoria smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Not anymore. The air inside the cabin shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it changed. Nearby passengers exchanged looks. A businessman across the aisle lowered his tablet. An older woman near the window removed her reading glasses. People sensed something wasn't right, even if they couldn't yet explain why. Marcus remained calm. "I purchased this seat 3 weeks ago," he said evenly. Victoria folded her arms. "And I'm telling you it's no longer yours." Her tone carried the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. A few rows behind them, a young flight attendant named Emily Carter froze while organizing carry-on luggage. She had scanned passengers during boarding. She remembered this man. She remembered the green confirmation on her device. She remembered seat 2A. But she said nothing. Not yet. Victoria stepped aside as a well-dressed white couple entered the cabin carrying expensive leather bags. "Right this way," she said cheerfully. "Your seats are ready." Marcus watched as the couple stopped directly beside him. Then Victoria pointed toward the very seat listed on his boarding pass. "Seat 2A. His seat." The husband hesitated. "Are we in the right place?" Victoria nodded immediately. "Absolutely." The couple settled in. The woman adjusted her designer jacket. The man reached for a glass of sparkling water. And just like that, Marcus Bennett's first-class seat belonged to someone else. No explanation. No apology. No verification. Just a decision. Victoria turned back toward Marcus and motioned toward the rear of the aircraft. "Economy is boarding quickly," she said. "If you move now, we can avoid delaying departure." The cabin grew quieter. Even the soft hum of conversation seemed to fade. Marcus looked around slowly, taking in every face, every reaction, every witness. Then he looked back at Victoria. His expression never changed. If anything, it became calmer, like a man watching a storm approach from miles away. "You're making a mistake," he said. Victoria laughed softly. "Trust me," she replied. "I know exactly what I'm doing." She had no idea that within 10 minutes, that confidence would become the most expensive mistake of her entire career. Marcus Bennett did not move. He remained standing beside row 2 while passengers quietly watched the situation unfold around him. The couple now occupying seat 2A avoided eye contact, settling into the expensive leather seats as though nothing unusual had happened. Victoria Hayes seemed pleased with herself. In her mind, the matter was finished. The wrong passenger had been redirected. The cabin could move on. But Marcus was not the wrong passenger. He glanced toward the window where the evening sun painted long streaks of orange across the tarmac. Aircraft lined up in the distance waiting for departure clearance. Ground crews moved with practiced precision beneath the fading light. Everything appeared orderly. Everything appeared professional. Yet inside this cabin, something had already broken. Victoria checked her tablet and spoke without looking up. "Sir, I need you to step aside so other passengers can board." Marcus nodded once. "Of course." His calm response seemed to irritate her more than resistance would have. She preferred conflict. Conflict could be controlled. Calm confidence was harder to explain. Several rows back, Emily Carter continued watching. She had worked for Skybridge Airlines for only 8 months. Long enough to learn procedures. Long enough to recognize when procedures were being ignored. Her eyes drifted to the electronic manifest displayed on her handheld device. She discreetly refreshed the passenger list. Seat 2A still showed the same name. Marcus Bennett. The confirmation remained unchanged. Her stomach tightened. She looked toward Victoria, expecting some explanation. None came. Instead, Victoria walked to the galley and quietly exchanged words with another flight attendant named Brian Mitchell. Brian glanced toward Marcus and smirked. Whatever was said between them was not professional. Emily could see that much. Nearby, a businessman seated in row 3 finally spoke. "Excuse me," he said. "Did that gentleman have that seat?" Victoria immediately answered before Marcus could respond. "Everything has been resolved, sir." The businessman looked unconvinced but returned to his tablet. Across the aisle, an older woman continued watching carefully. She had seen enough life to recognize when a situation did not add up. Marcus, meanwhile, slipped his phone from his pocket and checked the time. 6:14 p.m. 2 minutes had passed. His expression never changed. No frustration, no anger, no urgency, just observation, like a man collecting facts. Victoria returned and stopped in front of him once more. "I can offer you a complimentary drink coupon if that helps." A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even Brian looked amused by the suggestion. Marcus stared at her for a moment. "You believe this is about a coupon?" Victoria shrugged. "I believe some people have unrealistic expectations." The words landed heavily in the cabin. Emily lowered her eyes. The older woman by the window slowly shook her head. And somewhere near the rear of first class, a passenger quietly raised a phone and began recording. Marcus noticed. He said nothing. The aircraft door remained open. Boarding continued. But the atmosphere had changed. The cabin no longer felt like a premium travel experience. It felt like the opening scene of a mistake that was still growing, still spreading, and still far from reaching its final cost. The aircraft door finally closed with a muted thud at 6:16 p.m. A flight that should have felt routine now carried a tension that seemed to press against every row of the cabin. Marcus Bennett remained standing near the front of first class, still holding the boarding pass that clearly listed seat 2A. The paper looked ordinary. The problem was that nobody in authority seemed interested in reading it. Victoria Hayes tapped her tablet again and frowned. For a brief second, uncertainty crossed her face. Then it vanished. She handed the device to Brian Mitchell. Brian studied the screen and quietly nodded. Whatever he saw appeared to reassure him. Emily Carter noticed the exchange immediately. Something about it felt wrong. She glanced back at her own device and refreshed the passenger manifest again. The result did not change. Marcus Bennett. Seat 2A. Confirmed. She checked a third time. Still the same. Across the aisle, the white couple now occupying the seat began settling in comfortably. The husband removed a laptop from his briefcase. The wife accepted a pre-departure beverage from Brian with a smile. Neither asked another question. Neither seemed interested in why the man who originally held the seat was still standing nearby. It was easier not to know. Easier not to look. Victoria approached Marcus again. Her patience appeared to be fading. "Sir, this discussion is delaying our departure process." Marcus glanced toward the occupied seat. "You gave my seat away." Victoria shrugged. "Operational adjustments happen." The phrase sounded polished. Corporate. Designed to avoid responsibility while sounding official. Marcus nodded slowly. "Interesting." "What is interesting?" Victoria asked. "The confidence." Victoria folded her arms. "I am confident because I know how this works." The older woman by the window let out a quiet breath. Several passengers exchanged glances. The recording phone near the rear of the cabin remained raised. More people were paying attention now. More people were listening. Emily finally stepped forward. Her voice was careful, respectful. "Victoria, I think there may be a discrepancy in the manifest." The cabin seemed to freeze for a second. Victoria turned sharply. "Excuse me." Emily swallowed. "Seat 2A still appears assigned to Mr. Bennett." Brian immediately stepped in. The system was updated. Emily looked down at her device. "I am not seeing that update." Victoria's expression hardened. "Then you are looking at the wrong screen." Emily hesitated. She knew she was not. Marcus watched the exchange without interruption. His calmness only made the situation feel heavier. The truth was sitting in plain sight, and everyone could feel it. Yet nobody with authority wanted to acknowledge it. Then a businessman from row 3 spoke again. "If the seat belongs to him, why is somebody else sitting there?" No one answered immediately. Silence spread through the cabin like a slow-moving shadow. Victoria finally forced a smile. Everything is being handled appropriately. But the answer landed badly. Even she seemed to realize it. The questions were growing. The witnesses were multiplying. And somewhere beneath the polished language and confident gestures, the story they were trying to maintain was beginning to crack. Emily Carter felt her pulse quicken as she stared at the glowing screen in her hand. The information was simple, uncomplicated. Seat 2A belonged to Marcus Bennett. The system had confirmed it 3 separate times. Yet somehow the official story inside the cabin kept changing. Victoria Hayes turned away from her and resumed preparing for departure as though the question had already been settled. But it had not. Not for Emily. Not for several passengers now watching closely. And certainly not for Marcus. At 6:18 p.m., the aircraft remained parked at the gate. A delay notification appeared on several passenger phones. Quiet conversations spread through the cabin. People were no longer pretending not to notice. The businessman in row 3 looked openly frustrated. The older woman by the window had stopped reading entirely. Even the couple occupying seat 2A appeared less comfortable than before. The husband glanced toward Marcus more than once. Emily lowered her voice and approached Brian Mitchell near the galley. "I checked the manifest again," she said carefully. "The seat is still assigned to Mr. Bennett." Brian barely looked at her. Victoria already handled it. But the record has not changed. Brian sighed. "Emily, sometimes there are decisions made above our level." "Who made this decision?" Brian finally looked at her. His expression warned her to stop asking questions. Instead, Emily glanced at the boarding device hanging from his belt. The screen was still active. Before he noticed, she caught a brief glimpse of the passenger log. Something felt off. A timestamp appeared next to seat 2A. Recent. Very recent. Newer than the original boarding record. Her stomach tightened. Somebody had modified something after boarding was already complete. Across the cabin, Marcus remained standing with the same calm patience he had shown from the beginning. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. He simply observed. The silence around him had become strangely powerful, like an anchor in the middle of growing turbulence. Then the passenger recording from the rear stood up slightly. "Sir," he called toward Marcus. "Did they ever explain why you lost your seat?" Several heads turned. Marcus answered calmly. "No." The single word landed heavily. The businessman in row 3 shook his head. "That tells me everything I need to know." Victoria immediately stepped forward. "Passengers need to remain seated during departure preparations." "We are not departing," the businessman replied. A few people nodded. The atmosphere shifted again. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Emily felt it. The passengers felt it. Even Victoria seemed to feel it. The story she had been controlling was slipping away from her. Emily looked down at the manifest one final time. Then she made a decision. Quietly, she opened her phone and photographed the passenger record showing Marcus Bennett assigned to seat 2A. She knew she was taking a risk, but she also knew something else. The truth was now documented. It could not simply disappear because somebody wanted it to. And for the first time since boarding began, Marcus glanced toward Emily and gave the smallest nod. It lasted less than a second. Yet somehow it felt like the beginning of something much larger than a dispute over an airline seat. At 6:20 p.m., the cabin felt smaller than before. Not because the aircraft had changed, but because the truth now occupied more space than the excuses surrounding it. Emily Carter slipped her phone back into her pocket after capturing the passenger record. The image sat there quietly, undeniable and permanent. Across the aisle, the businessman in row 3 folded his arms. The older woman near the window continued watching every exchange. Even the couple seated in 2A seemed increasingly uncomfortable as more eyes drifted toward them. Victoria Hayes sensed the shift immediately. Authority depended on confidence, and confidence depended on people believing the story. The problem was that fewer people seemed willing to believe it. She walked toward the front galley and returned moments later with a gate supervisor named Richard Coleman. Richard was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and the practiced smile of someone accustomed to resolving complaints quickly. He approached Marcus with a clipboard in hand. "Sir, I understand there has been some confusion." Marcus looked at him calmly. "Has there?" Richard forced a polite smile. "We are simply trying to accommodate all passengers." Marcus glanced toward seat 2A. "By removing one of them?" The question lingered in the air. Richard hesitated. Victoria stepped in before he could answer. The seat reassignment was necessary. "Why?" asked the businessman from row 3. No one had invited him into the conversation, but several passengers clearly appreciated the question. Richard shifted his weight. Operational considerations. Another polished phrase. Another answer that explained nothing. Marcus nodded slowly as though filing the words away. Then, for the first time, something in his expression changed. Not anger. Not frustration. Recognition. He had seen this before. 23 years earlier, Marcus had stood in another airport wearing his best suit for an interview with a regional airline. He remembered the hiring manager glancing at him before looking away. He remembered hearing the words later that afternoon. You are qualified, but you are not the image we are looking for. The memory had never disappeared. It lived quietly beneath decades of success, waiting in places like this. Different airport, different faces. Same assumption. The flashback faded as quickly as it came. Marcus returned his attention to the cabin. Richard was still talking. Victoria was still defending decisions that made less sense with every passing minute. Emily watched all of it unfold. Then her phone vibrated softly. A message from another crew member appeared. Departure delayed. Internal review requested. Emily stared at the words. Internal review. That was unusual. Very unusual. She looked up at Marcus. Somehow he appeared completely unsurprised. The aircraft remained parked at the gate. The passengers remained attentive. And beneath the polished language, the corporate procedures, and the carefully chosen explanations, something important had already crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The people responsible simply had not realized it yet. At 6:22 p.m., Marcus Bennett finally looked down at his phone. The movement was small, almost forgettable, yet it drew Emily Carter's attention immediately. Up until that moment, he had allowed everyone else to control the conversation. Victoria Hayes had controlled the explanations. Richard Coleman had controlled the corporate language. The passengers had controlled the questions. Marcus had simply listened. Now that changed. His thumb moved once across the screen. A single call connected almost instantly. Rachel, he said calmly. No one recognized the name. No one paid much attention at first. Good evening, Marcus, came the voice through the speaker. Professional. Prepared. Status. Marcus asked. Monitoring active, Rachel replied. All records are preserved. Marcus nodded. Proceed. The call ended. 5 seconds. No dramatic speech. No threats. No raised voice. Just one word. Proceed. Victoria exchanged a glance with Richard. Neither appeared concerned. Why would they be? From their perspective, Marcus was simply another dissatisfied passenger making a phone call. Across the cabin, however, Emily noticed something else. Her device vibrated again. Another internal message appeared. Multiple executives notified. Review escalation initiated. Her eyes widened. That language did not belong to ordinary customer complaints. Richard's phone suddenly chimed. He glanced down and frowned. Then Victoria's phone chimed as well. Brian Mitchell checked his device moments later. 1 notification became 2. 2 became 5. The quiet rhythm of incoming messages spread through the front cabin like distant thunder. Richard stepped aside and opened an email. The color drained slightly from his face. Victoria noticed. What is it? She asked. Probably nothing, Richard replied too quickly. But it clearly was not nothing. Marcus remained perfectly still. The businessman in row 3 watched the exchange carefully. The older woman near the window noticed it too. People could sense when confidence started leaking out of a room. It rarely happened all at once. It happened in small cracks. A nervous glance. A delayed answer. A smile that no longer looked genuine. Emily checked her own device again. This time the message carried a different label. Compliance Division. Priority 1. Her heartbeat accelerated. She had never seen that designation attached to an active flight before. Victoria walked toward Marcus. Sir, if this is an attempt to escalate the matter, I assure you we are handling everything appropriately. Marcus looked at her calmly. That is exactly what concerns me. The response landed harder than any argument could have. For the first time since boarding began, Victoria had no immediate reply. Around them, phones continued vibrating. Richard opened another message. Then another. Brian looked increasingly uncomfortable. The passengers sensed the shift even if they did not understand it. Something was moving through the system behind the scenes. Something much larger than a seating dispute. Emily glanced toward Marcus once more. He did not look relieved. He did not look satisfied. He looked like a man waiting for a process to complete. Like someone who already knew the outcome and had simply decided to let everyone else arrive there on their own. Outside the aircraft window, The evening sky darkened over Chicago. Inside the cabin, the balance of power was beginning to move. Slowly, quietly, irreversibly. At 6:24 p.m., the cabin no longer felt like a delayed flight. It felt like a waiting room for a verdict. The steady stream of notifications continued appearing across employee devices. Richard Coleman stepped away again, reading messages with increasing concern. Brian Mitchell stopped smiling entirely. Even Victoria Hayes seemed distracted now, checking her screen every few seconds. The confidence that had carried her through the confrontation was beginning to erode. Emily Carter watched the change happen in real time. She had never seen senior staff react this way. Compliance alerts were rare. Executive reviews were rarer. But what appeared next made her heart skip. A system-wide notice flashed across her device. Active operational review. Executive oversight engaged. Do not modify passenger records. Emily stared at the message. Do not modify passenger records. The wording felt specific. Too specific. Across the aisle, the businessman in row 3 noticed the expression on her face. Something happening? He asked quietly. Emily hesitated. I do not know, she replied. But she did know one thing. The situation was growing beyond the control of anyone standing in this cabin. Richard returned moments later. Victoria, he said in a lowered voice. We need to talk. Now, she asked. Yes, now. The urgency in his tone caught everyone's attention. They stepped into the galley area, believing their conversation was private. It was not. Passengers could still see their expressions. Richard looked worried. Victoria looked defensive. Neither looked certain anymore. Meanwhile, Marcus Bennett remained exactly where he had been for nearly 15 minutes. Calm, patient, observing. The older woman near the window finally spoke. Young man, she said gently. Marcus turned toward her. Yes, ma'am. You seem awfully calm for someone who just lost a first-class seat. A faint smile crossed his face. Sometimes the seat is not the important part. The woman studied him carefully. Then what is? Marcus glanced toward the flight crew. The decision. The answer lingered in the air. Nearby passengers exchanged thoughtful looks. A few nodded quietly. They were beginning to understand that this had never been about comfort or upgrades. It was about something deeper, something harder to excuse. Then another notification arrived. This time Richard's face turned completely pale. He looked toward Marcus. Really looked at him for the first time all evening. Not as a passenger, not as a problem, as a person, and whatever he saw made him visibly uncomfortable. Victoria noticed the reaction immediately. What? She asked. Richard did not answer. He simply handed her the phone. Victoria read the message. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face almost instantly. For several seconds, she said nothing. The cabin fell silent. Even the passengers recording the situation lowered their phones slightly. Everyone sensed it. The moment before a storm finally breaks. Victoria slowly lifted her eyes toward Marcus. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the certainty. In its place sat a question she should have asked from the very beginning. Who exactly was the man she had decided did not belong here? At 6:26 p.m., nobody seemed interested in departure anymore. The aircraft sat motionless at the gate while an entirely different journey unfolded inside the cabin. Victoria Hayes stared at the message on Richard Coleman's phone as if it had been written in another language. She read it once. Then again. The result never changed. Executive Oversight Team activated. Atlas Aviation Group Board notification complete. Direct review authorized. Victoria slowly lowered the device. Her confidence had vanished. Around her, passengers watched in silence. Emily Carter noticed something else. A new image had appeared on several employee screens throughout the aircraft. It was a corporate profile photo attached to an internal executive alert. The photograph showed a man in a Navy suit standing before a wall of aircraft tail logos. The name beneath the image read Marcus Bennett. Emily felt her breath catch. She looked from the screen to the man standing only a few feet away, then back to the screen again. The realization hit. Instantly, Richard looked physically unsettled now. Brian Mitchell had gone completely silent. Victoria's eyes remained locked on Marcus. Suddenly, every decision made over the last 20 minutes looked different. Every assumption, every dismissal, every explanation. The businessman in row 3 noticed the reactions first. What is going on? He asked. No one answered. Then another notification arrived. This one carried no ambiguity at all. The executive profile expanded across multiple employee devices. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. Atlas Aviation Group. Parent company owner. Skybridge Airlines. Emily covered her mouth. The older woman near the window let out a stunned laugh. Several passengers exchanged looks of disbelief. The couple occupying seat 2A immediately sat upright. The husband glanced toward Marcus, then toward Victoria, then back toward Marcus again. The pieces were falling into place faster than anyone could process them. Marcus remained calm through all of it. He had not changed. The room had. Richard finally stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett," he began. His voice sounded smaller than before. "I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding." Marcus looked at him steadily. "There was never a misunderstanding." The words landed with quiet precision. No anger, no triumph, just truth. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but stopped. For the first time that evening, she seemed unable to find the right words. Marcus glanced around the cabin. Every eye was on him now. The passengers, the crew, the witnesses, the people who had spoken up, and the people who had remained silent. "You did not remove a passenger from his seat," Marcus said calmly. "You made a decision about a person based on what you believed he should look like." The cabin fell completely still. Emily lowered her eyes. Richard said nothing. Even Victoria could not argue. Because deep down, everyone knew he was right. Outside, the lights of the airport reflected across the aircraft windows. Inside, the truth stood in the aisle where it had been standing all along. The only difference was that now everyone could finally see it. At 6:29 p.m., the cabin remained silent. Not the comfortable silence of a flight preparing for departure, but the heavy silence that follows a truth nobody can undo. Marcus Bennett stood in the aisle while dozens of eyes remained fixed on him. The passengers were stunned. The crew looked shaken. And for the first time all evening, nobody seemed interested in seat assignments anymore. The argument that had consumed so much attention only minutes earlier now felt insignificant compared to what everyone had just learned. Victoria Hayes lowered her gaze. Richard Coleman stared at the floor. Brian Mitchell avoided looking at anyone at all. Their authority had evaporated the moment the facts became visible. The confidence that had once filled their voices was gone, replaced by the uncomfortable awareness that every decision they had made was now being viewed through a completely different lens. Marcus did not celebrate. He did not gloat. He simply looked around the aircraft that carried the name of a company he had spent 2 decades building. The cabin lights reflected softly against the polished surfaces around him, and for a moment he seemed less like a chief executive and more like a man quietly evaluating the consequences of something far larger than a single mistake. "This is why I travel alone," he said calmly. "Not because I enjoy surprises. Because reports only tell you so much. Eventually, you have to see the culture for yourself." Nobody interrupted. Emily Carter listened carefully. So did every passenger. Several employees standing near the galley exchanged nervous glances. They understood that this conversation was no longer about one incident. Marcus continued. "Over the past year, complaints reached my office from travelers who felt dismissed, ignored, or judged before anyone bothered to learn who they were. Most reports were explained away. Most investigations found nothing significant. Tonight I wanted to see the process myself." The words landed harder than any accusation, because they revealed something deeper than a single incident. This was not about one seat. It was about a pattern that had become invisible to those inside it because they had seen it too often. Richard finally spoke. "Mr. Bennett, I am deeply sorry." Marcus nodded politely. "I believe you are." Then he looked toward Victoria. "But apologies do not fix systems." The sentence hung in the air. No anger, no raised voice. Yet somehow it carried more weight than any public reprimand could have. At that exact moment, another notification appeared across employee devices. Operational suspension review authorized. Immediate compliance audit. Multiple gasps echoed through the cabin. Brian read the message twice. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she stared at her screen. Emily looked down at hers and saw additional details arriving in real time. Executive audit teams. Personnel reviews. Passenger record investigation. Corporate oversight deployment. The process had already begun. There would be meetings, interviews, documentation, decisions. None of it could be stopped now. Marcus glanced toward the window where the airport lights stretched across the evening darkness. Beyond the glass, Aircraft continued taxiing across the tarmac as though nothing unusual had happened. But inside this cabin, everything had changed. An airline can recover from a delayed flight, he said quietly. It can recover from bad weather. It can recover from rising fuel costs. What it cannot survive is a culture that forgets the dignity of the people it serves. The older woman near the window smiled softly. The businessman in row 3 nodded in agreement. Even the couple from seat 2A looked embarrassed by how easily they had accepted what happened. Several passengers found themselves replaying the evening in their minds, wondering whether they had spoken up quickly enough, or at all. Marcus turned toward Emily. "Thank you for documenting the truth." Emily looked surprised. "I was only doing my job." Marcus smiled. "Exactly." In that brief exchange, many people understood something important. Integrity rarely announces itself. More often, it appears in ordinary moments when someone chooses accuracy over convenience and honesty over comfort. Then Marcus looked around the cabin one final time. "I did not raise my voice tonight. I did not demand special treatment. I simply allowed people to reveal their standards. And now we will raise them." The cabin remained still for several seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words settled over the passengers with the quiet force of undeniable truth. Then the businessman in row 3 began clapping. The older woman joined him. Another passenger followed. Then another. Soon the sound spread throughout the aircraft. It was not loud or celebratory. It was respectful, thoughtful, genuine. Not because a chief executive officer had been revealed, but because everyone understood the real lesson. The problem was never that they failed to recognize an executive. The problem was how they treated a man they believed did not matter. And that was the part Marcus Bennett had come to uncover all along. Long before anyone knew his title, his influence, or the authority he carried, the most important test had already taken place. The results had spoken for themselves. And as the applause slowly faded into the evening air, everyone on board understood that the lesson would remain long after the aircraft finally departed the gate.